Alan Simpson was a United States Senator until 1997, and after that, he sat on a commission with Erskine Bowles. It was the chair of the National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform. And last week, in the Washington Post, he and Erskine Bowles wrote an op-ed piece for the Washington Post. And let me read for you the first sentence. 7 years and almost $7 trillion in new debt ago, we released a bipartisan package of tax and spending reforms. At the time, we declared the era of deficit denial was over. Sadly, the debate on tax reform in the House and the Senate suggests deficit denial is not only back, but also stronger than ever. The never dull former senator from Wyoming, Alan Simpson. Senator, welcome back to Big 550 KTRS here in St. Louis.
Oh, I love St. Louis, and of course I served with Danforth and Eagleton and Bond, and it was a great delegation you had from Missouri. And anyway, St. Louis, great town, great art museum. Eugene Field House, go down there and see it. It's beautiful. Well, enough of that. Here I am, yes, lurking, waiting to be assaulted by people who say, oh, you're trying to steal my Social Security. Oh, you don't care about old people. Oh, God, here we go.
You know what? Do you just want to host the show, and I'll just go to lunch? You can just do the rest of the show if you want to.
Well, anyway, no, I know what you do, and you have a great following, and it's kind of fun to do it.
Well, thank you.
You're a glutton for punishment.
Thank you for spending a couple of minutes with us. What was the reaction to this op-ed piece you wrote in the Washington Post?
Same as always. It's people come up to you, they look at you with soulful eyes, and they say, God bless you. You had the answer, and I loved what you did, except for that one part, and that's their part. And they'll cut your eyeballs out with a salad fork if you touch that part. And that part is something in the tax code. It's, home mortgage interest deduction, municipal bond interest, employer deduction, employee health care, parking for employees, you name it, pal, and they ain't going to let it go. That's the way it works.
Well, I want to read for you in this. This is a really great op-ed piece, and I recommend everybody. But I want to read what you wrote, you and Erskine Bowles, about this report 7 years ago. You said when you released the Fiscal Commission report, we were worried. This is 7 years ago, about keeping deficits below $500 billion a year and the debt below 70% of GDP. Currently, the current bill, if it's adopted, deficits would exceed $1 trillion, which is twice as much as what you're worried about, and the debt would exceed 99% of GDP by 2027. Alan Simpson, what happened to your party?
Well, they like everybody. It's called I hate spending, and I hate taxes. But let me tell you, when they get into a feeding frenzy on making sausage for that tax bill, because they knew they had to get it. If they didn't get it, the American people say, "What have you done out there? You haven't done a lick." And so they just added it on. That's what they do. And then they got gimmicks. The gimmicks they have, about letting something expire 10 years down the road, letting this happen. Let me tell you, the creativity of the budget process, you ain't seen nothing yet.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they would just put together what they want and hide it. They got all sorts of games. There's one called Overseas Contingency Fund. It's off budget. They're still using it. And you can fake that one for about $40 billion a year. You got the Defense Department is filled with glut. Erskine and I found, you still got things like the Department of Defense schools in America. Does anybody know that? They all have a superintendent, principals, teachers, cost billions. TRICARE, good grief, the premium's $540 a year. Some of these guys never even were on, active duty. They were in the Guard or the Reserve. You can't play out in this area. You get your butt ripped off.
Alan Simpson, what do you make of the criticism of this current bill that it is tax cuts for the rich and the middle class are going to get soaked, and it's class warfare in reverse? The middle class is subsidizing the tax cuts for the rich.
Well, I have no idea because nobody knows yet exactly what it does and how it works. But there's all sorts of little once they got rid of earmarks, remember that?
Yeah.
We're going to get rid of all earmarks. Oh, that'll be wonderful, because that's a sneaky thing to do. Well, let me tell you, they don't call them earmarks. They just get into the conference committee and they just slip the stuff back in, and it's in there, and it's called spending. And then if you're a Democrat and you talk about anything that has to do with touching Social Security solvency, or entitlement reform, or health care reform, let me tell you, those things are 1/3 of the budget, and not one person ran for president of the United States from the right or the left that said anything but, we're never going to touch Social Security and health care benefits and the entitlements. Well, gang, that's 1/3 of the budget, and when the time comes and interest rates go to historical figures of 5, whatever they are, wait, you're not going to pay $240 billion a year interest. You're going to pay $700 billion, and where does that money come? Comes from defense, education, infrastructure. Have a drink out there in the real world.
Alan Simpson, you old fool! Don't you?
You old coot! You old coot!
You old coot! Don't you know, Alan Simpson, former senator from Wyoming, that once the businesses get this money, they're going to invest it, and it's going to invigorate this economy, and we're going to have more tax dollars than we've ever had before.
They may invest it in a new account in the Cayman Islands or a yacht off of somewhere. Let me tell you, the places in the world where you can hide bucks, you and I have never known.
So you don't buy the argument that this is going to turbocharge the economy?
I don't know. It might. I have no idea. I was there for 18 years, and no projection I ever heard came true. So I'm pretty wary.
What about for real? Let's talk about the debt, because your good friend, former Vice President Dick Cheney, said, well, deficits aren't really that important. Each party blames the other one. But for real, what's the problem with running a deficit? We seem to be doing all right all these years with the deficit.
Well, the deficit, it isn't that critical, but the debt is. I mean, you can play around with the deficit all you want. So it's $500 billion or $1.2 trillion. It goes up and down. And somebody say, we need to stimulate spending. Well, what the hell do you think a deficit is if it isn't stimulus spending? But what's on automatic pilot is the debt. When you have Americans who don't understand the difference between the deficit and debt, you're dealing with really a population which is, some guy said, where's the population the most dense? And he said, above the neck.
So do you have no hope that this tax bill will do what you and Erskine Bowles wanted it to do 7 years ago?
It's going to do something. I mean, there's going to be money rolling around in there, and at some point in time, when the debt hits $21 trillion, and it's 99 or more percent of the GDP, and the interest rates go back to historical figures of 4, 5, or 6. You're going to find chaos in America, and then you're going to find out who's going to get hurt and who isn't. But I'll tell you, you got to be awfully stupid not to make Social Security solvent and at least talk about it, because you're going to waddle up to the window in 2034 and get a check for 23% less. And who's telling you that? The trustees of the system. 6 years later, the Medicare Trust Fund takes a big hit. Come on, it's absolute madness.
Would you vote for this if you were still a United States Senator?
Oh, of course you probably would, because your party would come to you and say, if we don't show up for a victory here, we'll be thrown out on our butts in the snow. Oh, yes. And then you don't want Pelosi, for God's sake, and Schumer back in there, and the way they keep bitching about McConnell and Ryan, that's who they're going to get. What an irony.
Alan Simpson, never a dull moment with you. Before we let you go, and I want to thank you for spending a couple minutes with us. The op-ed piece is in the Washington Post. You and Erskine Bowles, it is a must-read. I heard a story about you when you were growing up in Wyoming. You visited a Japanese internment camp?
Sure. They had 10 of them in America. Those people were pulled off of the coast of Washington, Oregon, and California. They set them up in the most remote areas. At that time in the 40s, there was nothing between this little town and another beautiful town 21 miles away, and suddenly a village of 11,000 people came up with barbed wire, guard towers, soldiers in the guard towers, searchlights, and here came the Japanese Americans who were, the majority were U.S. citizens, and that's where I met Norm Mineta. Went to a Boy Scout troop. The Boy Scouts said, "Hey, out there they got Boy Scouts." We said, "Hell, they've got searchlights and guns." And our parents said, "You go on out there. Those are Boy Scouts just like you are. They salute the flag. They work merit badges." And, and that was about 1943, and Norm and I made a friendship, then met together again in Congress, served on the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian, and helped build a new interpretive center out there, which everybody ought to see.
And so your parents, you being a Boy Scout, you said those boys in that Japanese internment camp, there are Boy Scouts there, go spend time with those Boy Scouts in the camp.
That's right. Then my dad's had been in World War I, not combat, but he said, those are American citizens. And if you were a Japanese American living in Denver or New York, nothing happened to you. Don't forget how this worked. They wanted to clean that coast off because a Japanese submarine had shelled the coast of California in March of 42, and they said, how did they get there? How did they find their way? Aha, spies. So out of a military necessity, total violation of the Constitution, they rounded them up, put them in the stables at Santa Anita, put them on trains and sent them to 10 camps in Wyoming, Hart Mountain, and Manzanar, and Tule Lake, and Post. That's the way it worked.
I guess your parents didn't know at the time that Norman Mineta would be a Democrat, huh?
Oh, I don't care who people are. God, they got to give that one a. That's what's got us in a box. Erskine and I, they say now, who voted for you that piece of that wonderful work of yours, 67-page report in English, says using phrases like going broke and shared sacrifice, and we'd say, well, we had 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, 1 independent. Why, no, but who were they? Well, Dick Durbin, that commie from Illinois. Well, we had Tom Colburn, that not that right-wing guy from Oklahoma. That's your country right now. It's pretty sad to watch.
Yeah. Alan Simpson, you are always welcome here. You've always been nice to me every time I've run across you, and best of luck, and thanks for checking in.
Somebody will want to run across me after this.